I really want to thank the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol Programs. They are funding tonight's program, and we are a nonprofit. We very much rely on the support of all of you out there to keep us going so that we can continue to bring these kinds of programs to you. So let's get into our subject tonight. Well, here's a definition of addiction, and there are many, many definitions out there. This is from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, but I really want to highlight chronic relapsing brain disease characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite harmful consequences. So we're going to break down a few of those things. But really what I want to talk about is, you know, when we talk about substances and addiction, for example, alcoholism develops when someone's drinking causes serious life problems. A substance use disorder develops when someone's drug or alcohol use causes serious life problems. A process or behavioral addiction develops when someone's gambling causes serious life problems. Same goes for shopping and spending, sexual activity, relationships, eating, technology use, and gaming. All of these can cause us to have serious life problems. But I love this quote this is from Dr. Miller, who at one time was the president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Addiction is not about drugs, it's about our brains. The brains of people who have addictions function differently than the brains of people without addictions. It's just that simple. It's not that simple, but it's that clear, I think, that we put so much emphasis on the drugs, and some folks like to demonize them and all that, and certainly some of them can destroy our lives, but it really is our very complex brains that we have that are at play here. And pretty much, you know, there are so many things that go on in everybody's brains with regard to mental health, behavioral health issues, but there are 3 neurotransmitter chemicals that play that have a direct connection to the onset and the severity of our drug dependence. Those are serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. And they all act differently, and they also can kind of predispose us to certain kinds of addictions. One person might be more inclined to misuse a drug that kind of speeds up their brain, like an amphetamine or cocaine or something like that, psychostimulants, but also dopamine. You know, somebody who's got some challenges with dopamine might want to feel less, want to feel like they want to quiet their brain. So they might be drawn more to alcohol or opioids or other depressants, things like that. So lots of things are happening in our brains that we just know the tiniest bit about. Really, it's such a complex organ, but thankfully there's a lot of research going on. But when we talk about addiction with regard to substances, not just, you know, not all this other process addictions like gambling, like other things, you know, substances do work a whole lot faster with that reward system. So because substance use has so many other implications, these are just a few things that can impact us. Obviously, physical health, mental health, relationships, and finances and legal issues. And some of these have a lot to do with the stigma that's associated with addiction, specifically to substances, in fact. So what are some of the signs? I've got to move this. Okay. Some of the signs might be irritability, mood swings. I'm not going to read through all of this. By the way, not only will this video be available, but I also have the PowerPoint loaded, so you can go through these slides and read them more carefully, because there's a lot of information in here. Okay, so why do people use substances? Well, maybe it calms them down, helps with anxiety, sleeping, focus. It feels right, takes me out of my head. But basically, in all cases, it just feels good. You know, that's how things get started. It just feels right. It just clicked in my brain. It was the warm hug. It was the friend I always wanted. It made me feel socially connected. Lots of reasons get us started, but, you know, lots of other things in our brains can take us further into progression. So progression, this is, I think, absolutely crucial to understanding addiction because, you know, well, let me just talk about this for a second. This is called the Jelinek curve. This was developed back in the 1940s, and it's been kind of modified over the years, but basically, and there are lots of details on here, but this is basically looking at the kind of the the progression from the onset of use to the dependence, getting into behavioral changes and all sorts of things down to the bottom, which could be cyclical. It could be that there's a constant, cycle of relapse. Sometimes just 1 or 2 times might be a relapse, but then coming back out into the recovery phase or the rehabilitation phase first, and then recovery. But I love this example that I heard years ago, and I think this really breaks it down, that Jelinek curve really simplifies it. So on the left side, you see what the addiction, the substance use disorder, and on the right, you see recovery. So basically what happens is we start off maybe wanting to try a substance, then we need the substance, that's dependency, and then we can't live without it, and that's full-blown addiction. And then when we are at that lowest point, hopefully we get there, before anything really catastrophic happens, and we can't live without recovery. And then we realize we need recovery, and then we want recovery and sustain that hopefully for a lifetime. So it's just a nice, simple way of breaking that down, I think. I just want to talk a little bit about the mixed messages we get and how that contributes to progression. We have a culture, certainly in this country, that glorifies alcohol use, especially right now. I mean, I'm sure if you're on social media at all, you're seeing all the, the jokes about, drinking and right now to cope with the coronavirus and all of that. So, that's where we certainly have societal acceptance. Even this is the movie Superbad, where the kids were all partying and drinking out of a Tide bottle, drinking alcohol, all this is so completely normalized. These are social norms in our culture, right? And then also, when it comes to prescriptions, it seems completely appropriate to be prescribed lots of things, maybe Adderall for ADHD, maybe an opioid for post-operative care, or it could be benzodiazepines for a variety of reasons. So, what happens when we get to this place where there's so much stigma and there's so much judgment and there's so much shame around it? And that's progression. What happens from that initial use to, having your life become completely unmanageable? It's a pretty cunning, baffling, and powerful disease. And it really does, and it doesn't usually happen overnight. I mean, it's very rare for somebody to go, from 0 to 60 in their addiction. And if that happened, if the consequences happened quickly, we probably wouldn't see so many people becoming addicted. So I'd just like everybody to think about the fact that this is progressive. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about how, the person with the substance use disorder has a new normal, which might include, stealing or doing things that they never would have done before the addiction set in. But we family members, and I'm a family member, we also get a new normal, and we do things that are not really things we ever would have done before. So I'll talk about that more in a moment. But why is it that some people do become addicted and others don't? Well, there are basically 3 legs to this. It's much more complicated than this, but this is a simple way of putting it. Genetics can play a huge role. So probably like 50 to 60% of our propensity for addiction comes from our genetics. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but we do want to take a look at the family tree when we have kids, especially, just to be wary that there may be some predisposition to addiction. Psychosocial, emotional, different complications like mental illness, ADHD can be a red flag, a risk factor. Other depression, anxiety, certainly trauma can be make us predisposed to this, and also environment. So what's the access to substances in my home, my neighborhood, friends, peer groups, that sort of thing. And all of these things are exacerbated by the age of the onset of use. The earlier we start using a substance, the much more likely we are to have an issue with them down the road. And if we look at opioids in particular and how genetics plays a part, so if you took 10, but this came to us, by the way, I have to give credit to Dr. Kevin McCauley. He shared this in a past presentation, and I really think this is helpful. So if you took 10 people off the street and gave each of them 50 milligrams of OxyContin, And about 4 of them would have dysphoria. They would say, yuck, I don't like that feeling. I don't ever want to have that again. Who could get addicted to this? I don't understand. The next 4 would be okay, would tolerate it and might actually even have a bit of euphoria, but they probably wouldn't misuse their prescription, and they would probably stop when they were told to stop. But for 2 of those 10 people, this is a life-changing experience. And we've heard this described over and over again about filling that hole, filling that space in them that they never understood until they had an opioid. And this is specific to opioids. This does not necessarily relate to who's going to become addicted. This is about who's going to have that effect in their brain. And it is completely related to our genetics. So it's a little bit of Russian roulette with some of these substances. Even when they're prescribed, we really don't know how our brain is going to react until we consume it, unfortunately. So really want folks to be cautious about this when taking these kinds of medications. So just a quick word about young people. I had mentioned that the age of onset of use was really a big factor in determining this. Here's very clear evidence of that. Research has shown that 1 in 4 of us who began using any addictive substance before we were 18, if we began using a substance before we were 18, we had a 1 in 4 chance of becoming addicted. If we wait until we're over the age of 21, that drops to 1 in 25. So really huge difference here. You can see when we start using substances. And that's all because the way our brains develop, we have all the things that are necessary when we're little to learn, like motivation is very active. And the kind of double-edged sword of motivation is it's important for learning, but it's also there for risk-taking. So, that's where the accelerator part of the brain is working really well. But the prefrontal cortex is the very last part of the brain to fully develop. That doesn't happen until we're 25 years old in most cases. And those are the brakes part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that says, this might be a bad idea. Maybe I should think through this a little bit. That's not fully there until we're 25 years old. So this is why, there's this expression that parents need to be the frontal lobe, because our kids just are not fully developed there yet and able to make these kinds of decisions. So also really want to talk briefly here about nicotine. We have, and it could be argued that these are the 5 probably most addictive substances. You could argue about the order depending on potency and a variety of factors, but it's in the top 5 for sure. And there's a lot of research that's being done about nicotine and how it can be a precursor to a lot of other challenges. So here are just a few things that, again, I'm not going to get too deeply into these. All of this data is going to be connected to that follow-up page so that you'll have access to all of this. But smokers are smokers of nicotine products. So that could be tobacco, it could be vaping. And Juul products, by the way, have very high potency nicotine because they're salts. So those smokers, though, are 3 times more likely to have non-medical prescription opioid use, meaning like they've either misused a prescription or were not prescribed it. And 85% of patients in treatment for opioid addiction smoke, which is even higher than it is for alcohol use disorder. Continued smoking for smokers and smoking initiation for non-smokers was associated with greater odds of relapse for those who are have a history with addiction. And this is something that's been a real challenge for our recovering community, because it's sort of kind of gone along with this, that you stop the other substances, but you continue to smoke, and that's acceptable. It's actually acceptable in treatment centers in many cases. But there's lots and lots of evidence that it does put folks at greater risk for relapse. And also there's some interesting research that shows that nicotine can prime the brain for cocaine addiction. So if somebody uses a nicotine product and then tries cocaine, their risk of becoming addicted to cocaine is much greater had they not used the nicotine product. So let's just talk briefly about pathways to recovery. One size definitely does not fit all. Some options might be interventions, 12-step meetings, partial hospitals, inpatient, outpatient, certainly sober living, other ways to support recovery. Here's some clinical pathways. that I won't break down, but lots of information again about all of that on our site. Here are some support mutual aid groups, different ways to stay connected, whether it's 12-step, secular, faith-based, collegiate, all sorts of things. And just want to touch on, somebody had asked a question ahead of time, and I'm glad they did. They brought up dual diagnosis, and it's a very broad category, but basically it's saying that if you have simultaneously a mental health challenge and a substance use disorder. Nora Volkow from National Institute on Drug Abuse says that as many as 6 in 10 folks with an SUD, a substance use disorder, also have at least one other mental disorder. I haven't met a treatment professional yet who doesn't think that number is actually higher than 6 in 10, but we know that it is very, very common. And there's this whole kind of chicken and egg question, right? So does the mental illness cause the substance misuse? Or does the substance misuse cause the mental illness? Does it mimics mental illness sometimes? So it can be quite complicated, but we know that, again, Dr. Volkow says that it's really evident that we need to treat them simultaneously. Both treatments need to take place at the same time. And I know most treatment centers do try to make this approach happen. Some are better than others, but we need to do our research when we know for sure that there is a co-occurring disorder or dual diagnosis. Treated the same way you would for many other things, but you might need to get into a little bit more psychotherapy, other medications. Some mindfulness would be very helpful, of course, and integrated intervention where the person receives both, as we said before, really important to attract or to address all of the challenges. So finally, this is where it gets really in my wheelhouse. This is absolutely a family disease. I have a son who thankfully is in recovery today, but I know that the challenges were really great for our family when he was in his active addiction. I was definitely at least as sick as he was. I'd like that there's this kind of cool interpretation of the Jelinek curve. Way too much on there for me to read to you, but basically this is the family's Jelinek curve, where we can absolutely hit a bottom. We can get our new normal. We can do things that we never thought we would do, driving our child to get their substance because we don't want them to get hurt being out there by themselves. Things like that the rest of the world probably thinks that we're absolutely crazy, but this is where we are when we get panicky and fear takes us over. So that's our bottom when we start doing these sorts of things. But the inner part of that curve is the person with the substance use disorder. The outer part of the curve is our, progression in this disease. So again, I hope you'll take a look at this on the website a little more closely. Again, just a reminder that there's support for us as well. We have a meeting finder on our site, but on this page, right now, it's going to also link you to where you can find online support since most meetings, unfortunately, aren't happening in person right now. Also want to point out that on our website, I'm going to have a link to a presentation that took place just this past December with Dr. Kevin McCauley. This is a masterclass in Addiction 101. He's a physician who's in recovery himself. He's worked in the treatment field for a number of years now. And he does a masterful job of explaining this. So that full presentation was recorded back in December. And that is all that I have. And I am so excited to turn it over now to John Becker. John, you want to unmute yourself? There you go.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So John, if you could just tell folks a little bit about you and jump right into sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. As Kim said, my name is John Becker. I am a person in long-term recovery. I currently work as the program director for the first responder program at Caron Treatment Centers. My background, prior to getting into this field, I worked as a police officer in Montgomery County, the borough of Hatboro, for 17 years. I was a detective sergeant with the Hatboro Police Department when I had my own issues with substance abuse and addiction. And for me, it was a different path than a lot of folks have. I ended up in the same place, unfortunately, but it started a little differently. My issues was with opioid pain medication, and it started around some health problems I was having. I ended up being prescribed Oxycontin, and my first pill to my last pill was only 13 months. So for me, the progression was very, very quick. The first 6 or 7 months, everything was fine, no issues at all. I continued to work. My department was aware that I was taking the medication, and everything seemed to be good. I wasn't abusing it or anything like that. It was probably the last 3 months, when I look back and revisit everything that happened, that things really started to fall apart. Now, I say there weren't any problems in the beginning. The one thing that did occur in the beginning was that I built a tolerance up to the pain medication very quickly. Um, Now, as Kim mentioned, those three legs to our vulnerability to addiction. For me, genetics plays a huge part in that. Addiction runs in my family on both sides. Lots of alcoholics and other drug abusers in the family. So I was very well aware of that. And as a police officer, I was very careful about my alcohol consumption and vigilant about that. Um, when those opioids were prescribed to me and I took that, it was like a switch was thrown in my brain. Kim talked about that feeling that the 2 out of the 10 people will have. I had it. Um, More importantly, for me anyway at the time, is it worked. It relieved my pain, and I was able to function where I wasn't without it. So the first couple months, 6, 7 months, the one thing that did change was my dosage. I probably had that changed 3 times over the course of those 13 months, to the point where my initial prescription was to take 120 milligram pill in the morning and 120 milligram pill at night. They were the extended release. At the end, I was prescribed 140 milligram in the morning, 140 milligram in midday, and 140 milligram at night. Even that is not the right way to take them. But I can tell you at the end, I was probably taking 10 to 15 of those a day. So here I am as a police officer, last person anyone ever would think would develop an addiction issue. One of my main jobs as a police officer was to go out and arrest drug dealers and lock up, folks that were breaking drug laws. So I was the last guy that anybody ever thought would have a problem. And for me, it was, the challenge was I'm taking this pain medication for pain that I don't know what was causing it. I spent those 13 months going to all kinds of doctors to try and figure out what had led to all this pain coming out of nowhere when I was prior to this very healthy. You can't tell by looking at me now, but back then I was 41. I was running 8 miles a day. I was in great health. And all of a sudden, pain out of the blue throughout my entire body. I spent those 13 months going to neurologists, orthopedic doctors, having bone scans, x-rays, blood tests, you name it. Nobody could tell me what was causing all of this, pain throughout my body. But what happens with most folks that stay on opioids for any length of time is, first I became physically dependent. And that happened pretty quickly, I'm sure. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but if I had to guess, I'd say probably within the first couple weeks, I was physically dependent, which means when I didn't take it, I felt sick. The actual addiction piece may have been later. And, looking back, probably somewhere around the 6-month mark, I was not only physically dependent on it, but I was psychologically dependent on it. So as often happens with addicts, I started to engage in behavior that certainly police officers aren't supposed to do, but that we don't like in any people in society, that kind of behavior. And, some of the things I'm going to share with you, I'm not very proud of, but I did them. So, and I think it's important to demonstrate how drastically people can change when they're caught up in their addiction. I went from being one of the most well-respected police officers in Montgomery County uh, to being a criminal. And by that, I mean, when you're getting prescribed 3 pills a day and you're taking 10 to 15, you tend to run out very quickly. Uh, as a police officer and a narcotics investigator, I had informants that I used to conduct investigations. And I started to utilize one of my informants to buy me pain pills off the street. Um, Not proud of that, but I did it to feed my addiction. Um, the other thing that I did was I was also our department's evidence custodian. So I had access to all the drugs in the evidence room, and I started to help myself to that when I didn't have pills. Um, Not proud of it, but I did it as a police officer in uniform, or as sometimes in uniform, but plain clothes. But as an active police officer, I was engaged in that kind of behavior. Um, I don't know that I had any co-occurring issues before my addiction, but I can tell you that I was traumatized by my addiction and by my own behavior. And I'll share about that in a minute. But
Hey, John, you froze for a second there. John, I don't know if you can,
I,
you froze up for a minute there. Can
I,
you, you're fine now. Can you just back up just a couple?
I'm not sure where I cut out.
Just, it was just a second. It was just,
Okay. Yeah. So around the 12th month, I guess I'll jump back to that. Two things happened during the 12th month of my use. The first was they found out what was wrong with me. And as it turns out, I have what is a autoimmune disease, a hereditary autoimmune disease called TRAPS. And the long and the short of it is I had a minor foot surgery a couple weeks prior to the onset of this pain, and they believe that that surgery triggered what was dormant in my body, and it basically attacked all my joints. I'm told that I, in essence, went from a healthy 40-year-old guy to an 85-year-old man with horrible arthritis overnight. So that was the bad news, what happened to me. The good news was the doctors were able to do some things to help me. Unfortunately, I was already an addict and already engaged in some of this other behavior, this criminal behavior. So what happened? I got caught also during that 12th month or that last month or so. I got caught, but I didn't know I was caught until about a month later. So that was the 13th month. While the investigation was going on, I was unaware of it, although I probably should have known. For me, once I did get caught and I was confronted about my behavior, I was a broken man at that point. I actually felt relieved when county detectives came to interview me. They were friends of mine. I knew them for years, and they came to talk to me about what was going on, and I was actually relieved to be caught. Even though I knew that my law enforcement career was over, that I was probably going to get arrested, possibly go to jail, my life had become just a train wreck. Everything I did revolved around opioids, either taking them, figuring out how to get them, being sick because I didn't have them. It was just a vicious cycle. And I didn't like the person that I had become. So I was honest. I talked about everything that I had been up to. I was suspended from the police department. Then I went and got into treatment. When I came out of treatment, I got into this field down the road, went back to school and things like that. But when I share my story, I always try to say there's a couple messages. And one of the things that was so important to me was family support and getting better. And I was very blessed. I have a wife that stood by me and stayed with me through everything. Even she works in law enforcement and, took a lot of heat around what had happened with me at that time, but she never wavered. Um, but more importantly, or not more importantly, but it also was important, was the rest of my family and friends that supported me, um, even though I had done some things that they were not very happy about. When I went into treatment, and this is where I was talking about being traumatized by my own behavior. Once the drugs were out of my system through the detox process, I, the guilt and shame that I felt around my own behavior was traumatizing. I spent the first 2 weeks in treatment with my head down, crying. I couldn't talk to anybody. I couldn't even look anyone in the eyes. I was that ashamed of who I had become. Uh, but through the treatment process, eventually I began to start to talk about uh, what had happened, what I had done, how I got where I was, and things like that. And a big part of that for me was the involvement in the first responder program, being in a room with other police officers and firefighters and military personnel and things like that, being able to talk to them, not feel judged, with shared similar experiences. That was very important for me in early recovery. Uh, I eventually retired. Technically, I retired from the police department, but I really resigned before I probably was going to get fired. I did get arrested eventually. The investigation was turned over to the Attorney General's office, and I was charged with 35 criminal offenses, 19 of which were felonies. Um, and everything that I took out of the evidence room was a felony. Um, I was very, very blessed that it took a while before my case came before the judge for sentencing. And by the time my sentencing date came around, I had almost 2 years in recovery. I was working at a treatment center already at that point, and I was back in school working towards, finishing my bachelor's, getting my master's, and eventually my license. So when I went before the judge, I was given a gift and wasn't sentenced to the 7 to 10 years that the Attorney General's office was asking for. I spent 15 days in Montgomery County Correctional Facility, 11 months in house arrest, and 7 years probation. The judge felt that the work that I was doing, helping other addicts and alcoholics, and the things that I had done prior to my addiction and since, he didn't feel would benefit me or the community to put me in jail. And I was very blessed to that, and I never forget that. I generally don't have bad days anymore. If I start to feel cranky or not happy about something, I just remind myself that I could be in jail, and I tend to get happy very quickly. Over the last 9 years, I've worked at a couple different treatment centers, running first responder programs, helping other first responders struggling with alcohol and drug addiction. And the message that I try to give anytime I do a presentation, whether it's to other first responders, the community, students, whoever, is this: addiction doesn't discriminate, and I never thought that I would have ended up where I did, or that I would have the problem that I did. But it got me. And because of the stigma to it, I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't going to ask for help. I couldn't tell the people that I worked with that I had an addiction. I didn't want to be seen as weak, all the things that go along with one being a first responder, but also having addiction issues. So I thought I could handle it on my own, even though my life just kept spinning more and more out of control. So, I say this to people, it can happen to anyone, believe that. But if it does happen to you, if you get help, your life does get better. My life today is 1,000 times better than it was before my addiction. I appreciate things more. I think I'm a better human being than I was before because of what I've learned through this whole process. I'm just a happier person, and recovery is 100% the biggest part of that for me. So for anyone who's got loved ones that are still struggling, please know that you never know when somebody's going to get it, and there's always hope that they will get it and things will get better. They did for me, and I never thought I'd get my life back on track, going from a police officer to a criminal facing, long time in prison. And now I'm the one that all the police chiefs and all the corrections folks and all the fire departments call when they have one of their members that needs help. So it's kind of rewarding for me to be able to have gone from one role to being, that addict and alcoholic, to now the role of helping everyone in those fields get the help that they need. So that's where I'm at with things. I hope I kept that to the time we were targeting, Kim. I know I could talk for hours, so thank you.
No, that was awesome. Thank you so much, John. And we have a couple of comments and questions, but I'm going to save those until after we hear from Nicole. But really, a few people have commented, just thank you for your transparency and your honesty. And, John has spoken with our program in the past, and I think what was most powerful to me, and I always love hearing your story, but especially the time when we were in another community where another person who was a very public figure had a fall from grace. And you really, by sharing your story, helped that whole community to heal. So that's powerful. And thank you so much for that. Okay, so Nicole, you ready to unmute and give us your story, woman?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you. Let's see. All right. Hi, guys. I do want to start by saying that this is a little nerve-wracking. I'm excited to be here. This is definitely a different platform for me. I enjoy speaking in front of people, and obviously, due to everything going on, that's not possible right now. So I do want to say that first to make myself feel better. But I do want to start at the beginning of, my road and growing up and where I came from and about my family. And again, like John said, this disease does not discriminate. I grew up with a great family, never had any trauma in my life. Both my parents, middle-class family, good people. I had anything that I needed, all the toys, all the love. Like growing up, I always felt very, very different. And there always felt like there was this emptiness inside of me growing up as a child, like from a young age. I struggled with anxiety really bad from a young age. And I just always felt different. Like I stood out from the crowd. And I never knew why. Never knew why, and all I wanted to do was figure out why Nicole felt so different. And like I said, there's nothing at home that ever went wrong. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten up to 6th grade. And even in Catholic school, I felt out of place. I had to wear skirts, and that made me uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable. And at this point in my life, I didn't know why that made me feel uncomfortable. And I made a transition into public school, 7th grade. And again, like I said, I always felt different, and, I was starting to, become curious with myself and why I felt this way. And, I found out that I liked the same sex and that I'm gay, and I hated myself for it. I absolutely hated myself. I didn't want to be somebody that I wasn't supposed to be. I felt like I wasn't supposed to be this person. Because a girl should be a girl. And like, this is just the thought that I had in my head, because of society. My parents, I was raised Catholic, like I said. It was not something that was familiar. It was like a foreign concept in my house. And still to this day, like this is a new thing being brought about in the world. People being familiar with the same sex relationships and stuff like that. And, with that being said, I was very uncomfortable. My 8th grade year, the 8th grade summer, going into 9th grade, I started smoking pot and drinking alcohol, and it was harmless at that time. like here and there, I thought it was harmless at the time. I never got in any trouble. My grades were good. I was playing sports. And that continued up until my 10th grade year. And again, going into high school, I played basketball. I was, starting point guard, and everything was good grades. But like my 10th grade year is when everything started to hit the fan. I had went through my parents' cabinets, and I found some tramadol, and it was from a very long time ago. It was from a very long time ago, and I was a very curious kid, and I started taking these tramadol, and very quickly my body got very addicted to it. I was taking up to like 20 of these pills a day, so that I wouldn't get sick. And this is my 10th grade year, and on top of that, that is when I started smoking a lot of pot, drinking a lot of alcohol, and I started hanging around all the wrong people. Like all those good friends that I once had, I started to push them away. The good grades, I started to push away. All those good things I had in my life, I was slowly pushing out of my life, and like causing this destruction, a lot of destruction around me. And a lot of my active addiction is a blur. After I started taking the tramadol and smoking weed on top of it, I started to dabble with Xanax. And once I got my hands on benzos, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. It made me feel on top of the world at the time, and that's all I ever wanted. I felt this feeling that I always wanted to feel. I didn't care what anybody thought. I didn't care of a consequence. Didn't care what you thought about me. And, I thought I finally found that feeling. And I got into a lot of trouble taking the benzos. It got me in a lot of trouble. And again, like I said, it caused like a lot of blankness. There's like 2 years of my life that I don't remember because I took so many benzos. I don't know if anybody knows much about them, but it kind of erases your memory. And so my 10th grade year, I started to struggle, and I asked my counselor at the high school I was going to if I could transfer to their alternative school, because I was still at the same time, I said I struggled with anxiety. It was a very large school, a lot going on. And I asked her if I could transfer to the alternative school. And they let me. In my 11th grade year, when I went to Roosevelt, I was still using drugs. I don't really remember my 11th grade year, and also when I went there. But then I was manipulating my parents into like sending me to a psychiatrist, and like I tried the psychiatrist, I tried everything, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. Like I thought all of this was normal because I've gotten so used to it. And I was very good at hiding it, and like my parents weren't aware of the severity of what was going on because I was very good at hiding it. I turned into a very manipulative person, a liar, a thief, all of those things. So it wasn't until that everything really came about my 11th grade year. At this time, I was prescribed Prozac and Adderall because I, manipulated the psychiatrist too, and they gave me the Adderall, and I was abusing all those things at once. And what happened was I ended up going into psychosis. I was manic, and I didn't sleep for 14 nights. And it's hard to talk about because it takes me back to that place sometimes. And it was very traumatic for me. It was scary. I don't wish that on anybody. So to this day, I don't know exactly how or why that happened. The doctors say it was, due to the mix of pills, whatever, withdrawal also. And all I remember is showing up at my mom's job 2 weeks later, show up at her job. I had a baggy shirt on. My hair was a mess. And mind you, I told you guys I didn't sleep for 14 nights already. Baggy sweatpants, a pair of sandals, and I walked into my mom's job, and I remember her face. Like, I ran in there and I said, "Mom, we need to fly out the country." And this was my reality. I thought this was really, really happening with my life. I told her we have to go. We have to go now. And I could see that she was very, very, very scared of what was going on. And I saw in her eyes that she realized like something is really going on with my daughter right now. They flew me to the ER. They sedated me. And I was there for a while, and they finally got me that night to sign some papers and sign myself into the psych ward at Horsham Clinic. And I went there. I don't remember signing those papers because like I said, they had sedated me. I barely slept there. All they did was give me more pills to calm me down. So the same thing was happening. I barely slept. I was scared for my life, still in like this psychosis, very, very, very manic. I ended up signing myself out of there, and I came home for 2 days. And as soon as I got home, I started using again. Like, as soon as I got home. And so 2 days later, right away, I went back to my job for whatever reason after all this stuff happening. And like we talk about like this insanity. I had no normalcy in my life. I didn't know how to be normal. I didn't know how to live a life like a normal human being would. So I went right back to the job, and still in this state of mind. Like, I had to freak out the job as soon as I went back. And I went home, and my parents knew that I was not okay at all. So again, my mom and my aunt, they said, "Nicole, pack your stuff, get what you need, and we're gonna go somewhere." And they took me to another psychiatric unit, to another psych facility, Brooklyn and Fort Washington. I went there. I stayed there for 21 days, and I appropriately detoxed there. And that place did help me a lot, by properly detoxing me. And I left there somewhat sane. And I stayed clean for a little bit after I left. I wasn't using anything. And but when I left there, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had no idea what to do with myself. I had cut everybody out of my life. All the people that were toxic, I cut them all off. And all I really did was lay on the couch and watch TV. And that's really all I did. And, one of my good friends, I finally started going to NA meetings. I would go, and I wouldn't raise my hand. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't say anything. But like, I was going with one of my good friends' fathers. And, he would take me to meetings, and he kind of brought me under his wing. And he ended up ODing and dying. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any coping skills, or I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know how to handle a death, especially with someone who took me under their wing. And I ended up relapsing. And once that happened, as soon as I started using again, I ended up back in the same places I was going to when I was in my active addiction the first time. The same places, the same people, those same behaviors. And after a week went by, I remember it was like 5 a.m. I was around the corner from my house, and I had a car, I had a license. I remember not being able to drive. Like, I knew if I drove, I wasn't going to be okay. So I walked to my house at 5 a.m. I knocked on my front door, and I remember my mom's face when she opened that door. And I just completely broke down, and I said, I need help. And it was not until then that I actually wanted to change something. So after being clean for about 4 months, it felt good in a way. I didn't feel okay, and I was a little bit in denial, this can't be my life. I'm only 16 years old at the time. I was 16. This couldn't be my life, not mine. There's nothing wrong with me. But it wasn't until I broke down and realized, what are you doing? What are you doing? And, my mom opened that door, I broke down, and, I asked for help myself. The hospital didn't make me go. No one forced me to go get help. And it was actually, I ended up going to the Karen Foundation up in Wernersville, and that place saved my life. Karen saved my life. I put my all in there. And, after that, I took all the suggestions. And I went there when I was 17, and I'm still clean to this day. I'm 21 now. And I'm so, so, so happy to be alive today. But it's not easy being young in recovery. It's a hard thing, but today I want the best for myself. Today, I live a good life. Today I'm honest and reliable. I can hold a job. I can do all these things that I never was capable or even thought that I would be able to do one day. Things that I never wanted to do. But one thing I do also want to talk about before I close down is my sexual orientation. That impacted me a lot during my addiction, because when I first came out to my family, like I said, it was frowned upon, and I hated myself for it. So when I was at home, I was one person. I dressed like a girly girl, and then I'll go out and I'll be someone else, dressing in comfortable clothes that males would wear. That's what I'm comfortable wearing. That's what I like. That's what makes me feel like me. And I was always this different person, and I felt like I could never, ever, ever be myself. And the only time I felt like I was able to be myself is when I was under the influence. But eventually that turned into a habit, obviously. But that was a huge, huge thing for me, because I was very uncomfortable in my own skin for a very, very long time. Today, that's not the case. I'm in a happy relationship. So thank God that ended up working out for me. And I'm accepting of who I am. But so I graduated high school. Sorry, I'm very scattered brain. This is so weird, not being able to look people in the eyes and hear people laugh. It's very different. But I got clean, my 12th grade year, and that was something that was really hard for me also, because, kids were able to just smoke pot when they left school or just drink on the weekends. And that was something that I couldn't do. So it was difficult to me to be a senior in high school. You get a senior week at prom. I didn't do any of those things. I couldn't. I knew I couldn't handle it at the time. So, and it was very hard, but I got through it. But today I have a full life. Under the circumstances, I'm living the best that I possibly can right now with the COVID. But I'm grateful that I was able to be here tonight. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, John, for sharing your stories. Definitely interesting. So thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Nicole. There are so many common threads to your stories and so many completely different parts of your story. It's just always interesting to me. I mean, the commonality that people with challenges like yours have, is seen in the 12-step rooms and other mutual aid groups. And, it's such a unifying, unfortunate occurrence that happens with us. But then it's just, I loved both of your stories so much because they're so different and unique to you. I mean, and, Nicole, I'll start with you. One of the questions that came up was, are you able to celebrate your recovery today?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, every day, in a way, I'm celebrating my recovery. And it can be in many different ways. Like I go to NA meetings, and I get, like, I share for Kim sometimes. I do work with some people. But every day just to be alive is me celebrating my recovery in a way, to be honest.
Great. This is for both of you, and I've got us on gallery view now. Hopefully everybody's seeing us in gallery view now. So for either one of you, can you, if you're willing to share whether or not you work a 12-step program?
I do. Going to AA, and I go to AA. A lot of the folks that I was in treatment with at that point were going to AA, and it fits for me. It works for me, and it was a huge part of me getting through those first couple of years. Having a sponsor, someone that I could, share everything with, working the steps, all that, And sometimes when I share my story, that gets lost because I just assume sometimes that people get that part of it. But yeah, without that, I mean, I talked about the first responder piece, which was important, but the other part of that was getting involved in a 12-step program. Without it, I wouldn't be here today, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and the same goes for me. I mean, the 12-step program saved my life, absolutely saved my life, especially being young and the realization of, like, there's other people out here and my age that are doing these things, that are getting clean and are in recovery, making new friends, and the sponsor. And right now it's very different. Everything's online. It's not something that helps me very much online. And that's just for me personally. And I do things every day, for myself that, keeps my spirits up, for the time being,
Great. John, are you facilitating or doing anything with an online group for people who are first responders in recovery?
We are, Kim. Yeah, actually, we've always had in-person um, peer support meetings, which not necessarily 12-step meetings specific for first responders. We kind of call them peer meetings. And what that looks like, it's a hybrid between a clinical meeting and a 12-step meeting. It's somewhere in the middle, facilitated by a peer with some training. We are doing them online now. So we have 3 days a week where we have those sessions, and first responders all over the country are able to join in and help support each other in recovery.
Nice. Okay. Lots of thank yous and kudos for your transparency for both of you. One question, do you think that jail is the answer for people with a substance use disorder?
I'll answer that. As a police officer, I never thought it was an answer. I felt that before I had my issues, I always felt that they were sick and always tried to get people that were users into treatment. I can tell you now that I absolutely don't believe jail is the answer. We're sick people trying to get well, not bad people trying to get good. For me, my behavior, my brain changed, and I justified my behavior in my own mind. If I wasn't sick, this wouldn't be happening. Once they figure out what's wrong with me, I'll change, I'll stop. And I didn't understand it at the time. It wasn't until I went back to school and really got educated on what happens when you get to that point where addiction takes over and the chemicals in your brain change and the chemistry and all that, it is a real change. And now I've gone back the other way. I've retrained my brain. So.
Nice. Okay, this is for both of you also. Was there anything anyone could have done to help you, to help more during your active addiction and to support your stopping?
For me, to be honest, I didn't want to hear anything. I did not want to be helped. It physically being in that position and mentally, it, like I said, it was not until I wanted the help that I actually went for it. Even like my parents, like they knew something was going on and that I wasn't okay. And I was always playing the blame game, like this is your fault, or you're the reason I'm like the whoever, blaming everybody but myself because I was in such deep denial that there was absolutely nothing wrong with me at all. And it came down to when I actually felt broken inside and helpless is when I wanted the help for myself. I didn't want to do it for anybody. And that's how it went for me. I didn't want to hear anything from anybody.
Yeah, real quick before I answer that, Nicole, I wanted to say you're really, really inspirational. And I'm so happy for you that you're finally able to be who you are without feeling, that you're not okay, because you are. You're fantastic. So
Thank you.
For me, I've been asked this question a lot in different ways, and I don't know if anybody doing anything differently would have helped sooner, because I was definitely in denial and resistant. But the one thing that I maybe would have helped me is if another police officer who had been through it had come and talked to me and said, you have a problem, you need help. Then maybe, and I don't know for sure because it didn't happen, but maybe that would have helped. And I know that I've been able to do that with other first responders and encourage them and be there to get them to agree to get help. Maybe. I don't know.
I'd like to actually chime in on that a little as a family member, and I've asked my son that question as well. What could I have done differently? What could we have done differently? And I can say that, I have to own, looking back, knowing what I know now, and I did not work in this field when my son was in his active addiction. I wish I would have had him assessed by someone who understands a substance use disorder, because instead we took him to a therapist who didn't have that background. He completely bamboozled her, said all the right things, and it wasn't her fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. It's just that we weren't ready to, give him that label that, oh, I think he has a drug addiction. We weren't ready to say those words. And I wish I had been ready sooner, because we would take our loved one to a specialist if they had any other signs and symptoms of a deadly disease. And we were just too afraid, I think. So I can certainly say that lecturing does not work. Tears don't work. It just kind of compounded, I think, the shame that he was feeling. And I really and truly wish we had stepped in sooner. We ended up doing an intervention that thankfully was successful. But we were, waiting for our loved ones to say, I need help. Like Nicole actually did that. That's really unusual. I mean, it's usually there's some other, kind of catastrophic event that wakes up the family member. So thank God for that you did that. Oh, Nicole, I work with 16 to 21-year-olds, this person said, and this is great insight for me to try to understand and support. So very nice. John, thank you for sharing. Did you think of getting help before you got caught? When was your family aware of your addiction? Great question.
Yeah, so to the first part, did I think of getting help? Fleetingly, because as a police officer, detective sergeant, um, the helper of help that of other people, I'm always supposed to be in control, and I kept telling myself, in an insane manner, that I can handle this, and I don't need help. Uh, Not true, um, but that's where I was. That's where my head was. Um, as far as my family, they didn't know, um, until I got caught and told everyone. And part of that was because I had some health issues. Anytime I wasn't quite myself, um, and was usually when I ran out of pain medication, I blamed it on the medical issues. And work didn't know because, as a well-respected investigator detective, I had a lot of freedom, and and I had earned that, and it wasn't unusual for me to be out of the office working on things and such. So if I was ever not in a good place, I hate to admit it, but I would hide, and avoid my coworkers. So, even though on some level, I knew I had a problem, um, I still thought that I could handle it. And once they figured out what was wrong with me, I would fix everything. Um, and, even though they figured out what was wrong with me, even today, I still have some level of pain. It's not gone. It's just managed now, with non-narcotic pain medication and some other stuff. Um, but you were never going to tell me that it was okay to go to my chief and say I become an addict. I need help. Um, I wasn't going to do that. You know, and like Kim said, at least my experience, the majority of folks that eventually come into treatment, most of them, there's some external force that has pushed them to that, whether it's the job, the family, legal issues, something has driven them to ask for help. Um, it's great to hear someone like Nicole who just made the decision, I need help. And that's fantastic. The goal is to get everybody to that place, whether it's before they come in or while they're in treatment.
Thank you. This is a really great question, and this was actually also asked in the registration process. What thoughts do you have for parents who have a young adult child who has relapsed several times? This person is in recovery for about 1.5 years and is very ambivalent about recovery, AA meetings, etc.
Well, I'll give you my perspective as a parent and as a clinician. Unfortunately, we can't want somebody to get better more than they do, and not knowing the particulars of that situation, there's kind of some general guidelines to be supportive in it when they want to get help, to set boundaries if they want to continue with the negative behavior, with the using, and the relapsing, um, and take care of yourself, is the biggest thing. It's really hard when it's a child, our children, to watch what they're doing, but the reality is we can't wish them into treatment, wish them to get better. So taking care of ourselves, setting healthy boundaries, and being there when the opportunity presents itself to get them help, when they become open to it. That would be my suggestion without knowing all the particulars.
Thank you. And I would suggest to this parent, I'm assuming this is the parent that's writing this, definitely connect to our support groups. In fact, if you want to contact me after the event, Tessa, maybe you can send out my email address to everybody through the chat. It's just kim@conversation.zone, but there's some really great resources for parents. And also I'd love to follow up with some other questions about, what boundaries look like. We have a really great presentation that was recorded a few weeks ago about boundaries, and that might actually, sometimes those boundaries, when they're put in place, help to raise the bottom, so to speak, for the person, to kind of get them a little bit closer to wanting to get back into recovery. But it's a tough one, but would love to talk with you more about that. So feel free to contact me personally and we can follow up. One question, what do you need from those around you? Presumably now, like today, what do you need from those around you? How about each go? Nicole, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, today from those around me, just being supportive and accepting of, my choices. Today, I don't try to look for acceptance from other people, even though it might feel good. I try not to look for that. But like from my perspective, from my parents, because I don't know who's asking the questions, but from my parents, what helps me today is just, being supportive of any choices that I make, being there for me, being loving and understanding and gentle. Those are things that help me.
For me, I'm very fortunate, I guess. My whole life has become about recovery, treatment and recovery, working in the field. So with my loved ones, the things that I look for from them and my friends is just patience and understanding, because the field that I'm in, a lot of late night calls from people in crisis, weekends, going to pick people up, going to meet with people, that sometimes takes me away from my family, but they get it. There were some folks early on in my recovery that were there for me in those situations. So I have a pretty good family that's very supportive of what I do. And also to know that there's times when I need to do things for me, separate from work, for my own well-being, my own, self-care and my own recovery, and to be patient with that and understanding. And for the most part, they are. I'm very fortunate with that.
Thank you. Okay, here's a question that was asked at registration. How do you help someone in early recovery get back into a routine that doesn't involve sleeping all day and being up all night? Now, I'll say one quick thing about that. If our person in early recovery was living in a recovery house and a transitional living kind of facility, that would not be acceptable there. So perhaps that might be something you want to adopt in your own home is, what are the roles of the house? Everybody's up by this time. Everybody's got this to do. That's just my little 2 cents, but I want to know what you guys think.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that, structure and routine is very, very important, especially in early recovery. Whether it's at a recovery house or back to your home environment or whatever it may be, routine, getting up, doing the same things over and over again, going to meetings, those types of things. If you're in that situation, my suggestion to try and transition that would be to sit down with that person and talk to them and help them find a purpose to get up. Why are you sleeping all day? And what can we do to shift you from a night owl to getting up, at a reasonable time with a purpose? I think no matter who we are and what we do in life, we need a purpose. And if we're sleeping all day, that kind of defeats the whole idea of living life, right? Staying up, and if it's a teenager or a 20 something, they're probably playing video games all night. And there's more to life than that. So again, it goes back to setting boundaries, and not necessarily in a confrontational way, but more in a loving and supportive way, that's not acceptable.
I do want to piggyback a little bit off what both you guys said. Like routine for me, especially in the beginning of early recovery, like I was that person for a little bit, because I did not know what to do with myself. but getting a job was helpful for me. I really struggled with downtime because once I started to do that, like stay up late, sleep in late, it became a habit. And that it became a habit, and it didn't make me feel good, and it was just like this domino effect. So wanting different, and like John said, like having a purpose, like finding a purpose and like searching for that, and constantly doing things that you don't want to do, like those are things that helped me. And just doing new things, that's what helped me a lot.
Thanks, guys. Here's just some feedback. I think this is kind of in response to the question about the young person who's not seeking recovery right now. As a parent of a child in recovery, I feel my daughter had finally found a counselor that she finally connected with helped a lot. Also, to find that right sponsor is very, very important. She's changed sponsors quite a few times, and I feel that it's okay as long as you have that person to turn to when you're feeling down and not okay. And I know we hear this a lot from parents like, oh, my son or daughter's just not found a sponsor that's right for them yet. You just need a phone number. It doesn't, it's not a marriage proposal. There could be a temporary sponsor. But that was one of the kind of criteria or conditions that we had. And fortunately, our son did have a sponsor, but I had that in my little pocket planner of like what to do if ... and all the things that I was hearing from. That's what helps with these support groups. You hear all of these recommendations and these, what worked, what didn't work. And so in my list of things to say to my son, if he didn't have a sponsor, was, I need to know you have one person you can call who's not us, who understands addiction, could be a mentor to you, or at least get you to the right connections. Cause we offered you treatment, you accepted it, thank God. Now you're going to have to find the people who are going to help you stay on that path. So for us, we want you to have at least one phone number, one person that you can call. So that's just something that helped me out. Okay, we are getting a little close to the end here, but I want to ask you, what is the best way to approach a loved one who is addicted and needs so there are two very similar questions. I'm going to ask them both. What is the best way to approach someone with a loved one who's addicted and needs rehab? Are there local interventionists available? And also, I'm trying to figure out why my daughter relapsed and how to help her now when she doesn't want help.
So Kim, three questions, I think, in that one thing, and all good stuff, right? So there's a lot of ways to approach someone that we know needs help and they're maybe not seeing it, or we want to find out where they're at. And in simplest terms, there's an informal intervention and a formal intervention. An informal intervention could be as simple as saying, Dave, you're really messed up. What's going on? I think you need help, right? That's an informal intervention. More formal one, very structured with a professional interventionist who, kind of facilitates how it's going to go. It's not about attacking, the person. It's more about expressing how the family and friends and loved ones feel with what's going on with the addiction. Locally, there are a number of interventionists that are available to help families with that. So, there's a lot of resources for that. To the third part, this is the toughest one. What to do with someone, how do you help someone that doesn't want help? And it's not an easy answer. And certainly as a parent, it's not easy to accept. But all we really can do is continue to love them, take care of ourselves, and be healthy. This is a family disease. If you have a child or a loved one who's caught up in addiction, it's affecting you. You need to take care of yourself first, because you're not going to be able to help that person if you're not well. And setting boundaries, as Kim said, sometimes when we set boundaries, we kind of up that bottom where somebody's willing to ask for help or able to ask for help. you can force people into treatment sometimes, you know, especially if they're kids and we can hold that money over them or the car. And I'll never say that there's anything, no such thing as bad treatment. If someone comes into treatment and they don't want to be there and they don't want help, my hope is always we're going to get you to where you do. But the reality is until somebody wants it and really open to it, you know, there has to be not only a desire, but a willingness to do the work. And without those two things, you know, you're going to struggle. Now, the good news is, you know, everyone sees relapse as such a negative thing, you know, when someone struggles, and there is negative with it. I get that. It can be heartbreaking when we see someone that gets well and then they go back down the same path. But a relapse is also an opportunity to learn and grow for that person to identify what did I do wrong, not wrong, but what can I do better? What was missing from my recovery? You know, I was doing 12 steps. I had a sponsor, but you know what? I didn't follow up with the therapist. All right, maybe that's the piece that's missing. So we can take a relapse as an opportunity to learn and grow and you know, move forward with a new direction or an added tool to the recovery toolbox. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. That was great, John. So we're at 8:30. We have one more question I'll ask so we can wrap up. But before anyone else leaves, some of you have shared some really lovely comments for both John and Nicole. And I just want to assure you that I'm going to make sure they receive all of your comments and chats and Q&A, all that stuff. So they'll have that feedback. But tons of warm thoughts and compliments to both of you for your transparency and your insights. So thank you. Okay, so our last question, I think Nicole touched on this a little bit, but my question is, how have you stayed engaged with recovery support during the COVID shutdown? I'm hitting my meetings every Wednesday at 7. Join us.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this. There's no shortage of meetings. Yeah, you know, the online meetings between Zoom and all the other platforms, you can pretty much sit in a meeting 24 hours a day now. For me, it's not the same as the in-person, but it is a way of staying connected. Being in long-term recovery, I have a pretty good recovery network and support network. So I'm on the phone all the time, even before COVID, with my people, so to speak, my sponsor, all that. So for me, the routine is pretty similar. And the fact that, you know, I go to work to a treatment center every day, definitely keeps me connected to the recovery community. So I have a little advantage maybe over the average person.
So for me, before COVID started, I had got a new job at an adolescent outpatient facility, PHP program, an IOP, and I was there for about 2.5 months, and then all this came about. I got furloughed from there, and I was offered a position at an inpatient facility, rehab. And that was like a blessing in disguise for me. Due to COVID situations, I'm no longer there as of today. But you know, that was a blessing in disguise for me to be, you know, helping other addicts, and to do groups with them and to sit in. It was helping me while I was helping them at the same time. But I do like a lot of self-help stuff. Like I listen to a lot of motivational videos and meditation videos, you know, while I'm driving. Like I do a lot of things for myself, in those ways. But that's one day at a time.
Awesome. And at the bottom of that follow-up page, there's something that we have on our site called Staying Connected. And Nicole mentioned a couple of really important things like podcasts and apps and different things. So there are so many ways to stay connected. And we know that this is a disease that that thrives in isolation. So we do want to stay as connected as humanly possible. That's why I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to have you guys with us. I want to thank you both so much, John and Nicole. You know, you're both just amazing people. I'm really feel blessed to have you in my life, and thank you. And to our attendees, when we close, you're going to have an opportunity to take a survey to let us know if this was helpful or not. Feedback of any kind is great. Even if you've done it before, please share your thoughts and let us know what you'd like us to talk about in the future. We have that option for you to check off those boxes as well. So, hey, thank you guys so much.
Kim,
Stay healthy.
thank you for allowing me, Nicole, and to be a part of this, and for the continued work that you do, getting the word out to everyone in the community. It's great stuff. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's always an honor. Always.
It's a joy to know you guys. All right. Well, good night, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us.